right, just past 2 o'clock on the East Coast. Want to thank everyone for joining us. This is the very first ever Ask the Howlers episode where we bring you thought leadership and experts from throughout the cybersecurity community. I will be very excited to introduce you to our 2 guests today, but the minor housekeeping get us started. This idea generated, I think, when we looked at our previous AMAs and webinars that we've done on enterprise security, remote work, and we wanted to give our audiences, give you a shorter, more digestible opportunity to come in, get some of the latest news that's out there in cybersecurity, and also offer our perspective on it. Most importantly, give you an opportunity to ask some questions, right? It's the Ask the Howlers session. So with that, you have the opportunity at any point to use your chat function to jump in, ask any question you may have, hopefully in some way pertinent to the topic of record, but if not, we're happy to triage those questions and answer them as they come up. So today we're going to run through a little bit of the latest security and threat news. We'll also bring our experts in to offer their perspective, particularly as it relates to COVID-19, which is the topic of the day. And then we'll do some Q&A. But most people, when they have not had an introduction to date to the Howlers, right? So what is a Howler? So the Howlers is a group of cybersecurity experts at VMware Carbon Black. I have the privilege to work with them very closely on thought leadership content, on media engagements. I like to say that each of these folks have cybersecurity well ingrained in their DNA. And in their day jobs, they're engineers, sales engineers, threat researchers. They're supporting our customers. They have specific expertise in various verticals, so spanning financial, healthcare, hospitality, you name it. There's probably someone within the organization that can speak to, certainly at a high level and often in much more detail, the precise attack techniques and trends that we're seeing in those spaces. So that's what a Howler is, and you can Google Carbon Black Howlers to find more information and see the roster of people that this team comprises. But with that, I want to introduce you to the 2 Howlers joining us on today's call. And I want to give a quick thanks to Jackson Larango for managing the back end of this. Jackson, thank you for all of your help in setting this up. Great idea generating from your department, and hopefully we have many more to come. My name is Ryan Murphy. I've hosted a number of webinars before. Hopefully my voice is familiar to you. I'm a founding team member of the original Carbon Black team, but I am here in a facilitative role today to introduce you to Stacia Tympanick and Mike Marx. So Stacia and Mike, thank you for joining the very first session. You are in the leadoff spot, so a lot of expectations for both of you. Thank you both for joining us today.
Absolutely. I guess I'll kick off introductions first. My name is Stacia Tympanick. I've been with Carbon Black. I just was talking about this morning. I'm celebrating almost 5.5 years. So I've been lucky to come in at the beginning. I've supported businesses starting from small business to mid-market, and now doing more enterprise-based customers. But I've also been lucky enough to work for the West Coast, in the central region of the US, and now the East Coast. So pleasure to be here.
Great. And Mike, welcome to you as well.
Thank you, Ryan. And my journey here at Carbon Black has been the last 5 years or so, starting off with a little bit of support in our technical areas with our customers, as well as doing some field sales work out in the Western territories, and then working with Ryan and some of the founding team on vision and strategy going into the future with our product development, customer development, and community involvement.
Yeah.
So thanks for having me.
Both of you for this and the work that you've continued to do for Carbon Black. Your footprint is well noted throughout the organization. So I realize I jumped on you there, Mike, but thank you, truly. So Stacia, let's kick it off with you, right? You and I had some discussion ahead of time, what you're seeing in the news, right? The big topic, COVID-19. In some respects, right, in this conversation, there is some fatigue around it, but you certainly have a unique perspective. And when you look at how most organizations have migrated to a remote workforce, the healthcare industry very unique case, right? Because they've been required, mandated, right, to do that transition very quickly. Without being hyperbolic, there are lives on the line when you consider healthcare's role in all of this. And we looked at a number of articles, news articles that we saw, and there was the typical, hey, make sure you patch your systems, make sure you have offline backups in the case of ransomware. And these points are great, right? They're the standard blocking and tackling advice that we would give to any organization. But as it relates to COVID-19, healthcare orgs were either in a position where they were prepared or they weren't. And in the case of not being prepared, there's not really a whole lot of time to implement these best practices. So you went out and found some articles that drilled into, what is really impacting healthcare right now, regardless of the protections that are in place. And why don't you kick us off there, specifically as it relates to the new front in the coronavirus battle, right? With healthcare, cybersecurity, what are you seeing? What's your unique perspective? And ultimately, what's your advice to organizations out there?
Yeah, so as far as the article that I really focused on, it comes from Smart Brief, as you mentioned, the title, Healthcare, Cybersecurity, New Front in the Coronavirus Battle. And specifically, one of the things that it talks about is back on March 6th, right? The Department of Homeland Security alerted healthcare organizations to coronavirus-themed phishing campaigns. And, this is something where for most healthcare organizations, right, it was either you were prepared or you weren't. It's not like, oh, well, let's start implementing better VPN measures, or let's make sure that a lot more people are set up for success with VPN, or you either were ready or you weren't. And most teams that we talk to really are not enabled to be as proactive as they'd like. So now that we're in this situation, what are things that we can make sure that we can do, that we can achieve to at least make sure that our workforce is aware that we are now in a fragile state? And I thought this article was good because it talks about specifics of the campaigns, right? For instance, one of the campaigns talks about emails from the WHO, containing an ebook about the coronavirus. And I thought it was interesting that the way that they found out that this was not a legitimate, email was that coronavirus had a hyphen in it, right? It's like, wow.
So misspelling, misspelling. Yeah.
And it's like, I just think about when we're in our product and sometimes you look at a cert and it's like Microsoft, comma, space Inc. or Microsoft Inc. period. It's like how, first of all, the level of detail to even realize that is kind of like, oh, okay. But I thought it's good. I think it's good. This is an opportunity for you to reach out to your, employees to make them aware. Hey, listen, if you get an email from the World Health Organization, it has to be a .int domain. It's not going to come from a .com or .org. And there was another campaign that involved attackers recreating the World Health Organization portal, which is even a little bit more, it's scarier to me. So for me, so as a healthcare organization, what can I do? Just doing the muscle memory of, hey, listen, we just want to let you know there's an uptick in phishing campaigns specific to COVID. Be aware of that. Look out for these things. And it's basically no cost action that organizations can take. I know organizations like KnowBe4, Cofense, Sygenta, they have some great out-of-the-box posters that you could even get into an email mail merge, something of that nature.
Yeah, so it comes down to education, right? I mean, that's the theme, right? There's always an opportunity to educate, the onus of responsibility on security professionals to do that now. I imagine that time is limited, right? They are working remotely on the ground, trying to potentially chase alerts, make sure that workers can get up to speed when it comes to remote working. Any tips or tricks from Stacia or Mike when it comes to educating employees, particularly as it relates to phishing emails, right? Because that seems like it's low-hanging fruit for us in cybersecurity, but for many employees, right? And phishing continues to be one of the main vectors of successful attacks. How do we, as security pros and employees, educate the rest of the business about phishing's risk? And I'll toss to both of you there. Either can answer. Mike, Stacia.
Let me go for that. So communication, Ryan, you know what communication is all about.
Right.
So distilling that down into something that your employees can digest is not necessarily all the same package. So there's maybe an employee that might have the ability to digest that communication through an email, and some might have to digest that through being informed in an instruction-led type environment. And that really comes down to how leadership wants to bring that into the organization. And with even our own research, we're finding that almost half of the healthcare organizations that we've surveyed are doing training multiple times a year. So they're trying to sink time into this and a lot of different ways, but I think that comes down to the engagement with the employee base from not only the cyber and technology leadership in the business, but also from the executive leadership in the business. Stacia, I don't know if you've seen anything else in that regard.
Yeah, I mean, I think VMware, just speaking from what we're doing, I think that they've handled the situation really well, right? They have a site that's specific to COVID resources for internal employees. I think it's also important that you think of the different ways employees take data in, right? Some people are visual learners, so sending them a sample of what a bogus email might look like, things like that to me, are going to, okay, when I open an email and I saw this somewhere that I shouldn't be seeing it or I shouldn't be opening it. Whereas other people are going to, and using multiple channels, there's just I don't know about you guys out there, but for us, especially getting acquired by VMware, right, we have our internal systems, VMware has their internal systems, and finding different ways to get the word out is really important because you don't want your employees to miss it. So finding what's most effective to make sure that your employees actually literally get the message, I think is really important to consider when you're putting something like this together.
Yeah, and Mike, you made an interesting point there with respect to communications, right? So bandwidth is super low for cybersecurity teams right now. Recognizing that, I think the communications role within the organization, so this may be a team of people, right? You may have a comms team, or you may have a comms person, or maybe none of the above, right? But you do have potentially a good writer at your organization that is willing to lean in and help right now. So my recommendation is use them. They are willing to help. They often are aware of communication methods that are bold and brief, right? More importantly, brief. They can get a message across pretty quickly. So 30-minute meeting with that person or team can go a long way if you have an idea for educating your workforce on something like phishing emails. And if you can, right? I mean, if you're on this webinar right now, put in the chat, what are you doing? How are you educating your team? What have you done? What would you like to do? What are some roadblocks that you've encountered? And we can certainly bring them up. Let's switch topics, guys, right? Like there's a whole interesting ethical component to all of this. And if you look at ransomware, right, and some organizations have come out and say, well, we're not willing to attack healthcare systems, right? There's some level of altruism in that, potentially, right? And have said, well, we'll stay away from healthcare organizations, but we're still going to target the pharmaceutical industry because we think they're profiting, right? So they're not necessarily on the front lines of COVID-19 care, but in producing drugs and setting prices, there is some ethical dilemma that exists here. So Stacia, let me ask with you first, right? When some attack groups say, hey, we're not going to target healthcare orgs or healthcare systems, do you believe them?
I feel like any answer is wrong here, but you want to. I think it's even interesting to take it a step further in that article that they talked about, that if they did by accident target a healthcare provider or agency in some way, that they would provide the decryption key, like, even if we do it by mistake. So what the question is okay, so these guys are stepping up, these threat actors, boys and girls, are stepping up and saying, we're not going to do it, right? We're going to lay low, but we're still seeing attacks, ransomware attacks that are targeting the World Health Organization. There was a hospital in the Czech Republic. There's Illinois Public Health District. And to your point, one of the questions is, who's doing that, right? Who are these threat actors doing that? The second thing is, well, now as a supply chain vendor, right? Am I going to be, now it's kind of shifting the focus, right? I should probably be like, okay, ooh, this is something to be aware of, right? They got to make their money somehow. They're going to shift from healthcare to supply chain. And I actually think this is a good point, because Mike, you took up more of a, how blockchain is kind of coming in to address supply chain issues. And I think this is kind of a cool way to, bring in that, can that help supply chains? And what does that look like to help make sure that those companies are protected during this time?
Yeah, and it's an impossible dilemma, right? Like to believe or not to believe, and the default stance, right, for a security professional is, well, okay, well, that may be the case, but I'm not going to take any action or inaction, right, to not defend or not gain visibility into ransomware because someone said that, right? The reality is it just takes one bad actor to come out and target a healthcare organization, because as attackers have proven outside of COVID-19, opportunity persists, whether that's the Olympics or the Super Bowl or a particularly vulnerable industry, right, that can be lucrative at any given time. Attackers are opportunistic. So I suppose the message there is be very hard to unequivocally believe an attack group when they say, hey, we have the best interest of the world in mind. We're going to lay off for a little bit or for a while. It's hard to think that'll be the case. And I suppose a question for the audience, you have that chat group, do you believe attackers? Hard to think that anyone's going to say, yes, of course I do, and everything is fine. But if you have any specific thoughts, pop it in there. Let's switch again here, move on from ransomware and the ethics of it, because that could probably be its own discussion. The concept of volunteers, right? Stacia, you sent that an article to the group. And again, we'll share all of these articles that we're referencing with all attendees. So no need to do some cryptic Googling, like you'll have links to everything that we're referencing following this call. But talk about volunteering, right? The article from the Daily Swig talked about volunteer organizations, Cyber Volunteers 19, and what role have volunteers played in all of this in helping to combat the threat landscape amid COVID-19?
Yeah, I actually found two. One is EU and focus, UK and EU focus, and that's the Cyber Volunteers 19. And then the COVID-19 Cyber Threat Intelligence League, they seem to be, more open to doing things in the US. Not that Cyber Volunteers 19 isn't, but yeah, they're kind of focused, right? You got to start somewhere. You got to focus somewhere. So, I just think that this is so awesome, right? People are, and if you just check out the Twitter pages of these two organizations, like all you see is people saying, how can I help? How can I help? And I just think that that is something that is touching, because sometimes the cyber community can be a little tough to each other. A great example is like what's going on with Zoom, right? Everyone, and I understand people attack Zoom because of the issues that they had and the vulnerabilities that they had. But, at the same time, sometimes we bring ourselves down. We like to kind of go after, like, who can we go after and get our pitchforks out after? And, if I'm a regular person that wants to chat with my family or do something of that nature, like I had, old people calling me and saying, should I not use Zoom? And it's like, how far are we going to go here? So I really like to try to find, like, all right, I get it, but let's also look for the good things that we can do as a community so that we're not always getting this kind of stuffy, the cybersecurity community. Sometimes I feel like security always has that kind of tone to it. I want to see that change. So I think it's really cool. If we look at Volunteers 19 specifically, so I think their approach they're taking is really smart, right? They're starting, let's focus on frontline hospitals, ensure that remote video conferencing, for instance, with all the new advancements in telemedicine, telehealth. Let's make sure that if you're going to do that, that it's set up securely. Making sure that things like patient health information isn't just being exposed in Google Docs. So they're actually going into organizations, finding these things that again are not too invasive and aren't plumbing, right? They're just more of aesthetics. And let's go ahead and let's see if we can just make these tweaks for you so that you're not an easy, low piece of hanging fruit. And now they're kind of starting to get enough where they can go out, and once they're done with this, they're going to try to move to doing more private doctors' offices. So I think that's really cool. And as far as the Cyber Threat Intelligence League, they actually have a great GitHub site that we'll put the link in there. And it's intelligence that includes files vetted and approved for a blacklist, hashes, IPs, domains, bad actors. Even Cyber Volunteers 19, they publish a weekly intelligence briefing that goes out, and it goes out in 7 languages. So what's interesting about that is they're still looking for volunteers, but they're actually looking for translators because they need people to be able to get these kinds of comms out into the different languages. So I just think that those are really kind of cool things that we as a community are doing to paint ourselves in a positive light.
Yeah, and I like that angle, right? And you look at video conferencing software, how ubiquitous it is now, and I think anytime there's a major mass technology adoption, attackers are going to try to find potential vulnerabilities. But in the conversations that we've had with video conferencing vendors, Zoom in particular, like they're taking security at the utmost level of seriousness. And it's good to see and hear, right, that there are organizations, volunteer organizations out there that are willing to go outside the scope of their day jobs, even often outside of the scope of information security, like translation, and offer a lending hand. And that's right in a time when it's so easy to go online and find the bad news or projections that are potentially sobering, finding the helpers in all of that. And thank you for bringing those volunteer orgs to our attention. And again, we'll share those links in the follow-up comms on this. So Mike, I wanted to shift to you, right? Stacia earlier, blockchain, of course, synonymous with Bitcoin for most consumers, right? If they had to do a word association, that would be the first to come up. Your expert blockchain indicates that it's being used for way more than just Bitcoin validations and rosters. Take us through what you've seen and read with the various innovations with blockchain.
Yeah, so thanks for bringing that up, because to being the hero and volunteering, what it's actually being witnessed inside of that area of the tech industry, if you will, and security and cybersecurity and privacy, if you will, is implementations into healthcare organizations to fight theft of identity first and foremost, to protect those vital statistics that are being recorded against a pandemic like today. And one of the partners out there in the community, IBM, has actually put out a solution to help build a trust your supplier model, so that you can go out to a marketplace of suppliers to meet the needs of your healthcare workers in the demand of the current pandemic. So we're seeing hospitals adopt some of this in a couple of aspects, not only to protect the privacy of their patients, but also to protect the risk inside of their organization from the things that we talked about earlier, like our supply chain effects inside of our ransomware attacks. We might not frontline the hospital with the ransomware attack because maybe they have some good frontline defenses in place with cyber tools, but maybe we'll go to the pharmaceutical billing provider and start there. And that's where we start to see these trust your supplier ideas start to play into the bigger organizations as a risk mitigation into attacks, the attack surface, really, at a lot of levels.
Yeah. And so you think, rating this 1 to 10, like blockchain here to stay with COVID, right? How effective do you think it'll be, and how prevalent will it be in ultimately like solving this problem?
That's a that's a really, it's like, what's the price of Bitcoin is the next question, right?
Right. Right.
You know, I want to say this, and the vision in the way I see this unfolding in the current state with the onboarding of people into these kinds of systems, you're going to see data become a new currency and a new line item on your CFO's balance sheet. So down the road, we're going to start seeing a measurement of risk inside of a data category that's going to be measurable out in the systems implemented and secured inside the organization. And that's going to be tracked to a financial, approach in the business now. So I see that coming into play, and how they measure that is going to be how they can get insight into where the risk is on, where it is introduced and where it's relinquished.
Yeah.
I think it's kind of cool too, because, I think that there's going to be kind of a new role out there, right? With applications that could be built with this blockchain as its backbone, right? Like right now in the security industry, I feel like, or even just in tech, there is a lot of want for cloud architects, right? People that are well versed in configuring secure cloud infrastructure. Will there be, a blockchain, analyst or blockchain, infrastructure provider of some sort? I think that that is kind of a cool new possibility for a job in this market.
100%. Yeah.
Yeah. To be determined. So again, we promised 30 minutes, and we're not going to go over. We want these to be short and sweet. So Jackson, I'm going to go off script here. If you can jump down past the Q&A slide to the upcoming events. Wanted to focus your attention on the next episode. So the next one, focusing on MITRE ATT&CK framework, where the VMware Carbon Black technology may fit into that, right? But more importantly, from a high level, how to use the MITRE ATT&CK framework to increase your cybersecurity posture, right? That focus on behaviors is critical to all of that. So we'll have some of the threat researchers from the threat analysis unit, Jared Myers, Greg Foss, Jimmy Assel. Names may be familiar to you if you've read some Carbon Black reports or been on similar webinars like this. So sign up there at the link you see in your slide there. It'll be sent out at the end of this, and we hope you can join us for that. And next week is our CB Connect conference, annual user conference, and that is free. Right, it's a virtual event now, as many organizations have taken their conferences. It was initially scheduled for Chicago. Travel is not on the agenda, so you have the opportunity to participate. We have some big announcements coming out from VMware Carbon Black. We are releasing the Modern Bank Heist Threat Report. It's an annual report we've done for 3 years now. That'll be released sometime during Connect. But beyond that, you'll have access to folks like Stacia, folks like Mike, can answer topical questions. You can go super deep in the weeds on the technology or stay high level. So one final question, and thanks for those who submitted comments in the chat, particularly as it relates to education, right? We're getting mixed feedback on its efficacy and how email filters, right, which are often relied on to catch phishing emails in many respects, failing the test. So be interesting to take that discussion further during a follow-up session. One final question to both of you that was posed in the chat, and we'll close with that. So figure 30 seconds each, right? We've looked at remote work. Stacia, we'll start with you. Remote work, do you think it is the new norm? Is it here to stay? And how do we prepare for the long term when it comes to employee access, right? Flexibility to do their jobs, but also security. Realizing that 30 seconds is not enough time to answer that question, but see what you can do.
Yeah, I think it's going to shift. I think a lot of organizations are going to look to moving employees to remote, as long as employees work that way, right? Some employees do not like the remote full-time work life. And I think that it's going to be time to really take a look at how do we ensure that our network is proactive so that no matter where a user travels, that we have visibility, that we can make sure that they're enabled to do their job properly. So I think those projects are going to be the focus once this starts to kind of settle in a little bit more.
Mike?
And as what Stacia's saying, I double down on that. I think you're gonna see a lot more folks stay in these roles from a remote position, but more importantly, there's going to be more focus in the business to look at where the risk is when we're all seeing this from more similar perspectives as a work from home environment now, and not from an office in one city and an office in another city with maybe some social influence in there. So you're going to start to see a little bit of that risk collapse inside of some transformation in that business over time to make that even simpler.
Yeah, I think you're right. And again, that's time, right? We want to stay to that 30-minute window, recognizing that everyone is busy. It's great. Every attendee that started seems to have stayed for the whole time. So thank you for that. Thank you to all the attendees who joined, who submitted questions and feedback, and thank you in particular to Jackson, Stacia, and Mike. Pretty good first session, guys. I'm looking forward to doing more of these, and we appreciate having you on. Thanks a lot.
Thanks,
Thank you.
guys.